Okay. Hey, this is Alex Yoder with Pro Tip Tuesday, my favorite day of the week. And today we're going to talk about evictions, specifically in El Paso County. And I'm fortunate enough to have Ken Davidson, my favorite Colorado Springs attorney, here on the call or on the video to kind of go over what we're seeing in El Paso County. There are a ton of questions. There's a lot of confusion about what we should do, what we can do, what's legally enforceable. As we kind of navigate the CARES Act and we navigate the Colorado governor's order, and then even beyond that, looking at sort of what the courts out here are willing to do and what the sheriff's department is willing to enforce. So, Ken, maybe you can just start out by talking about what we're seeing the local courts do, and maybe the sheriff's department, and kind of what you see just happening in your world.
Okay. Right now, El Paso County, although a new order just came out yesterday, keeping the courthouse basically closed for civil matters all the way to the end of July, they've made an exception for evictions, and we can now file evictions again. And when I say we, I'm talking about attorneys or pro se individuals. One thing they are now requiring, because the courthouse is technically closed, for somebody to file a pro se or an eviction on their own without an attorney, you have to go to their website. They have a call-in line where you can set an appointment to get an appointment to go in and file your eviction. You can't file it without an appointment. My understanding is that you come in, you're on a list, so they'll let you in the building. You go to your appointment, you have to have your paperwork all completed and filled out. If it is not, they will send you away and set you a new appointment to come back. And then they're just setting regular eviction hearings, just like they always did in the normal course, which is approximately 10 to 14 days from the date you file. They have certain dates and times reserved for pro se evictions, but that's now what's required if you want to file an eviction. So if you're going to do that, you want to make sure you have everything filled out and in order.
Now, you made a comment about how if they're calling in, if you're self-representing, basically, there's no voicemail or anything. So basically, you have to get lucky to get through to set up the time to go there?
Yes. When you call their call-in line, you get the message that here's what you have to do to set an appointment. But at the end, it says, we do not respond to voicemails. Don't leave a message. Just keep trying until you get through. So you do have to just call until you get through to a clerk that can set your appointment.
Okay. So in other words, just use an attorney.
Well, we think that's best anyway, but yeah, that's how you have to go about doing it if you want to get it filed.
Okay.
And they also have some limitation on the number that you can file. So you couldn't go into your appointment and have 25 evictions to file. I don't know what that limitation is, but my best guess is it's probably 3 or 4 or 5 cases, but I really don't know that.
Now, let's say, the property owner has you do the eviction, and before we can actually file, what kind of documents are you needing to make sure that folks are sort of complying with the Fed expectations and the state regulations, so that when we get to court, we're not just going to hit a brick wall?
Right now, what is additional, I mean, you always had to have obviously your summons, your complaint, your demand and the answer form. Those were the standard requirements. But now, because of the federal law, they have what they refer to as a CARES Act affidavit. That's located on the court's website. You do have to have the CARES Act affidavit filled out. They also are requiring that you provide something that shows that you have complied with the governor's directive to send out to the tenant notice of the CARES Act provisions. That they do not have on the website, or at least they didn't a few days ago when I checked. So to me, the easiest way to comply with that is to just do like a certificate of mailing that says we sent this to the tenant on such and such a date. It can be mailed, it can be emailed, it could be served or delivered just like you do your demand, however you want to do it. And there is no requirement that it be done a certain number or days or time in advance. So you could actually do that at the same time you served your notice. You could do it the day before you went into the court to file your eviction, but they are requiring something to show that you complied with that governor's order.
Now, let's say that you initiated eviction prior to COVID even happening. Or maybe you've done it after the fact and you've posted the appropriate 30-day notice, which is now what Colorado is requiring that we do, I guess through the 13th of July?
Yes.
Okay. So either way, you've done the right thing. You've posted the appropriate notice. You're ready to kind of go into the eviction process. What do you think that's going to look like in terms of the time frame, to get in line to kind of be able to enforce those?
I've heard differing things, but I called the appointment line late last week and got lucky and got a clerk, and just so I could find out. And they were at that point in time setting hearings. Now this was last week, but they were setting self-represented hearings the second week of July. So July 6th, 7th, 8th, somewhere in that time frame. How quickly those will fill up, I don't know, or I don't even know how many slots they're going to make available. But they were allowing people to get in reasonably quickly.
Okay. And so you may get in the July time frame, and then the actual enforcement of the writ. You had previously made a comment to me about how there may be some additional assistance with the sheriff's department enforcing these, but that may only go through like the end of July or something like that.
I spoke with the sheriff's department, it's probably been a couple of weeks ago, and they had prearranged to add additional deputies, and what they were going to use was the sheriff's office provides school resource officers to a lot of the schools. Well, obviously those school resource officers were out of work because the schools were all out, and they were going to use those officers to add to their staff so that they could, because they were expecting a flood of writs. And the downside to that is that staffing goes away sometime in August when the schools go back. So hopefully they will be able to serve a whole bunch of the writs as they come in and stay somewhat ahead of it to get things, from getting too far behind.
Yeah, because, normally in a normal situation, we would see around a 60-day, start to finish from posting to getting them out of there. And I think the writ time kind of to get with the sheriff can be 2, 3, 4 weeks. yeah, my guess is it may be 2-3 months for them to get caught up on the backlog, but I guess we'll have to see how that ends up playing out.
Yeah, that's just going to be, we'll just have to wait and see, because we don't know how many writs are going to come in, and we don't know how long their additional staffing will last, or I don't even know for sure how many additional deputies they're going to use, whether they're going to have 2 or they're going to have 20, so I don't know.
What's fascinating to me is that we have, our company manages a little over 700, and out of 720 some odd tenants, we have one person who actually hadn't paid prior to COVID, so it actually wasn't necessarily directly connected to COVID, who is effectively refusing to pay and is under the impression that his rent will be forgiven and that I can't get him out of there. It's very frustrating as you have homeowners who are really suffering and not able to pay their mortgage. And sure, there are some possible forbearance options, but who's to say that the full balance won't just be due when that forbearance expires? And so we're just trying to kind of navigate these waters. But I am pretty amazed, honestly, with sort of the impact of this on an economic level, at how folks have been able to pull through and still cover rent. And out of that many tenants, we've seen a very small percentage in increased delinquency. And we frankly, a lot of us in the industry expected a higher percentage. So I'm curious how many evictions people are actually seeing on their backlog with all these different companies. Now, this is all pertaining specifically to non-payment, right? I mean, if there is, if for example, there's an issue that has nothing to do with non-payment that could potentially be legally enforceable to remove somebody from a property, we could always proceed as normal as long as the local courts were taking those cases, right?
That's our plan, yes. In fact, when they allowed us to start filing again, probably 98% of the cases we filed were for lease. The lease was up. They'd been given a notice to quit. There were lease breaches other than non-payment. That was what the vast majority of them were for. Okay.
Now let's say that the property is covered under CARES. Can we talk about that just for a minute? My understanding is that we have to wait at this time for property covered under CARES. If you were trying to get somebody out of the property because of non-payment, whether you're posting a notice, a 10-day notice at the time, or you're simply giving them a notice of non-renewal because they haven't paid, we would have to wait until the end of July. And what kind of notice requirement will we be posting at the end of July?
For a CARES covered property, you can't serve a notice, and you can't do that until after July 25th. So the soonest you can do that is July 26th, and then it requires a 30-day demand. So the governor's order kind of fit into what they were doing on the federal level with the 30-day demand. That's what it's going to require, is a 30-day demand, which means your eviction will be delayed, obviously, until the end of August, the first part of September, before we'd be able to file.
Okay, so just to recap, if there's a issue with non-payment specifically, we need to wait until the end of July, after the 25th of July, to post a 30-day demand for them to cure or quit. And then at the end of August, we would actually be able to file should they not pay the balance in full during that cure period.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And it's so difficult, especially for folks who don't do, this professionally. They're not looking at these bills every day. They have, 1 or 2 properties. Many landlords in our group have 1 or 2 properties, and they've never had to do an eviction before. And so they're just trying to navigate those waters. So for those of you who are in that, kind of fall in that category, Ken Davidson, can you represent individual landlords as well as property management companies?
Yes, yes. Now, one thing too, Alex, that you ought to point out to everybody, the governor did sign they didn't call it rent relief, but a rent relief bill that provided $19 million in state funds. Well, they're state funds, but they're getting them from the feds, to provide landlords with rent assistance. So that landlords and or tenants that are affected with the COVID can ask the state for money to pay rent. Now, the problem is the bill does not have any direction as to what they're going to pay, how you apply. It doesn't, there's nothing in it. It just says it's going to be available. The tenant can apply for the money, so can the landlord. But I have no idea how that's going to set up. I'm sure that the state is going to adopt some kind of rules or regulations for applications. The only requirement in the bill was if you get rental assistance from the state, you can't evict the tenant for non-payment of that month's rent.
Right.
But if they're paying the rent, then normally you wouldn't be a victim anyway. So, but that is something that's out there. How it's going to happen or how you apply for it, I don't know, but it is something that landlords need to be aware of, because they may be able to get money from the state to help, tenants pay rent.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I think something else that's important just to note is that for those of you who are not landlords, is that landlords don't want to evict anybody. We don't want to do evictions. It is done by necessity. If there is no rent coming in, we don't have a mortgage, or we struggle to pay our mortgage. And I'm glad to hear that there is some kind of assistance being provided for landlords and for tenants alike. So do you know, Ken, if that's been signed by the governor at this point?
It has been signed.
Okay.
So it has gone into law. So, but again, I haven't ever heard anything more about it or how they're going to implement it.
Okay. They may do some kind of a press conference announcement and have, some kind of web-based application or something at some point, I'm guessing, which is good to know, because my one situation where the gentleman hasn't paid since, I think, March, that would be a good situation to help that property owner out, and I guess ultimately help that tenant out. So, okay. Well, I guess we will continue to keep folks updated as that progresses. The moment that I hear that there's some kind of link or application, I'll pass that along. And I'm assuming, Ken, that when you hear that, all the people that you represent will know something about what's going on there as well. So I'll kind of pass along the message that you have to everyone else here. If folks are self-representing landlords and they have an eviction situation, what is the best way to reach you?
They can call. I mean, if you have questions or need an eviction, you can call us. My number is 390-7811. We get most of our evictions now by email. You can email me. My email address is just my name, Kenneth Davidson @earthlink.net. So either way is fine. My office is actually open too, so if somebody wants to come by the office and drop off papers, they can do that. We're at 305 Main Street in Colorado. Well, we're actually in Security. It's a Colorado Springs mailing address.
Okay. All right, Ken. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I think that'll be valuable for a lot of people. And you have a good rest of your day.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
See you.